Dr. Michael Harrison stood in the hospital corridor as the winter sun filtered through the tall windows. At 58 years old, he had learned that life rarely gave second chances, and yet here he was, holding a tiny baby boy whose labored breathing had brought him running from his office just minutes before. The emergency call had come through while Michael was reviewing quarterly reports for the 3 hospitals his foundation operated across the state. He had built an empire in healthcare, not for the wealth, though it had come, but because he believed every person deserved excellent care. Despite his billions and his administrative duties, Michael still kept his medical license active and took shifts in the emergency department. His colleagues thought it eccentric, but Michael knew the truth. Being a doctor was the only thing that had ever truly mattered to him. The infant in his arms had been brought in by a young nurse from the pediatric wing. The baby's lips had taken on a bluish tinge, his tiny chest struggling with each breath. Michael's trained hands worked quickly and calmly, administering oxygen and calling for the necessary equipment. Within moments, the crisis passed. The baby's color returned and his breathing steadied. As Michael held the now peaceful child, something inexplicable stirred in his chest. He looked down at the infant's face, studying the delicate features, the way his small hand curled against the hospital blanket. There was something familiar there, something that tugged at memories he had carefully tucked away 30 years ago. "Dr. Harrison," a soft voice said behind him, trembling with emotion. Michael turned slowly, and the world seemed to tilt on its axis. Standing in the doorway was Natasha Miller, and she looked exactly as he remembered, though time had added silver threads to her dark hair and fine lines around her eyes that somehow made her even more beautiful. "Natasha," he breathed, her name catching in his throat. She stood frozen, her hand pressed against her mouth, tears already streaming down her face. "Michael," she whispered, that's my grandson. That's Tommy." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with 30 years of silence. Michael looked down at the baby again, then back at Natasha, and suddenly he understood. The familiar curve of the eyebrow, the shape of the tiny ears, all of it made sense now. "Your grandson," Michael repeated softly, his mind working through the mathematics of time. "Then your daughter, Sarah," Natasha said, stepping into the room. Her voice was steady despite her tears. "She's 30 years old. She's down in the cafeteria getting coffee. She doesn't know you work here." Michael felt his knees weaken and he carefully sat down in the nearby chair, still cradling Tommy. 30 years ago, he and Natasha had been young and desperately in love. They had met in college, 2 dreamers who spent their nights talking about changing the world. He was studying medicine and she was pursuing teaching. They had planned a life together, had whispered promises under the stars. But then his father had died suddenly, leaving behind debts and responsibilities that fell on Michael's shoulders. He had made the hardest decision of his life, accepting a prestigious position in Boston that required him to leave immediately and work grueling hours for years. He had told Natasha he was going alone, that their dreams would have to wait. She had begged him to stay, had told him she had something important to tell him. But he was young and foolish and certain he was doing the right thing by establishing his career first. "You tried to tell me," Michael said now, his voice breaking as understanding washed over him. "That last night, you said you needed to tell me something important." Natasha nodded, tears flowing freely. "I was pregnant. I was going to tell you that evening, but you said you were leaving, that we needed to pause our relationship while you built your career. You seemed so determined, so sure it was the right thing. I stood there with the words on my tongue, but I couldn't say them. I couldn't trap you with an obligation when you clearly wanted to go." "Oh, Natasha," Michael whispered, his own tears falling onto the blanket that swaddled Tommy. "I would never have gone if I'd known. Never. I thought about you every single day. I built everything I built thinking maybe someday I could come back and be worthy of you." "You were always worthy," Natasha said, moving closer. "I should have told you. I should have fought harder. I was young and proud and hurt, and I convinced myself that you had made your choice. I raised Sarah on my own, and she was the best thing that ever happened to me. But there wasn't a day that went by when I didn't wonder what our life might have been like together." Michael looked down at Tommy, who had fallen asleep in his arms, completely peaceful now. "Tell me about her," he said quietly. "Tell me about Sarah." Natasha sat down in the chair next to him, and in the quiet of that hospital room, she painted a picture of a life Michael had missed. Sarah had been a curious child who loved books and animals. She had gotten Natasha's kindness and, Natasha said with a small smile, Michael's stubborn determination. She had become a veterinarian, dedicating her life to helping creatures who couldn't speak for themselves. She married a good man named David, Natasha continued. They have Tommy and a 3-year-old daughter named Emma. They live just outside the city, in a house with a big yard where the children can play. Sarah is a wonderful mother, Michael. She's patient and loving and strong. She had to be strong, Michael said quietly, growing up without a father. She had a father, Natasha corrected gently. My dad stepped in and was wonderful with her. But I won't lie to you, Michael. There were times when she asked about you, when she wondered why her father wasn't around. I told her the truth, that we had loved each other but life had taken us in different directions. I never spoke badly of you. I couldn't, because despite everything, I never stopped loving you either. The confession hung between them, honest and raw. Michael reached out his free hand and Natasha took it, their fingers intertwining as naturally as if 3 decades hadn't passed. I never married, Michael admitted. I dated, I tried, but no one was ever you. I threw myself into my work, into building something that mattered. I told myself it was enough. But every night, every single night, I wondered where you were and if you were happy. They sat in silence for a long moment, two people who had lost 30 years together, mourning what might have been while holding the promise of what could still be. What happens now? Natasha asked softly. Before Michael could answer, a young woman appeared in the doorway. She had Natasha's dark hair and his own gray-blue eyes, and Michael knew instantly that he was looking at his daughter. Sarah stopped short when she saw them, her gaze moving from her mother to the stranger holding her son. Mom, she said uncertainly, is Tommy okay? Who is this? Natasha stood slowly, reaching for her daughter's hand. Tommy is fine, sweetheart. This doctor saved him, but there's something I need to tell you, something I should have told you a long time ago. Michael watched as understanding slowly dawned on Sarah's face. She looked at him carefully, studying his features, comparing them. Perhaps to old photographs she might have seen. Her hand went to her throat and she made a small sound, something between a gasp and a sob. You're him, she whispered. You're Michael, you're my father. Michael stood carefully, still holding Tommy, and faced his daughter. I am, he said, his voice rough with emotion. And I am so very sorry I wasn't there. If I had known, Sarah, if I had known for even one moment that you existed, I would have been there for everything. Every birthday, every school play, every scraped knee. I missed it all, and I can never get it back, and I am sorrier than words can express. Sarah stood trembling, tears streaming down her face, and Michael braced himself for her anger, for her rejection. He would have deserved it. But instead, she stepped forward and gently took Tommy from his arms, then looked up at him with eyes so like his own. Mom told me stories about you, she said quietly. She said you were kind and brilliant and that you wanted to help people. She said you would have been a wonderful father if you'd had the chance. I used to dream about meeting you someday, about you walking through our door and being part of our lives. I would like that chance now, Michael said, his voice breaking. If you'll give it to me. I know I can't make up for the past, but I would like to be part of your future, and Tommy's, and Emma's. If you'll allow me. Sarah looked at her mother, who nodded encouragingly, and then back at Michael. Then, with one arm holding her sleeping son, she stepped forward and embraced Michael with the other. Michael's arms came around both of them, this daughter he had never known and this grandson he had just saved, and he wept. In the months that followed, Michael learned what it meant to be a father and a grandfather. He met Emma, a precocious 3-year-old who decided immediately that he was her favorite person because he let her ride on his shoulders through the hospital corridors. He met David, Sarah's husband, a gentle man who worked as a teacher and welcomed Michael into their family with open arms. Michael and Natasha began slowly, carefully, rebuilding what they had lost. They took long walks and longer talks, filling in the gaps of 30 years apart. They discovered that they still made each other laugh, that they still finished each other's sentences, that the love they had shared had never really died, but had only been waiting for them to find their way back to each other. On a spring evening almost a year after that fateful day in the hospital, Michael stood in Sarah's backyard watching Tommy take his first steps. Emma was cheering wildly and Natasha was holding his hand, and Michael felt a peace he had never known in all his years of success and achievement. I spent my whole life trying to build something that mattered, he said to Natasha, watching their family gathered on the grass before them. I thought it was the hospitals and the foundation and the medical advances. But this is what matters. This right here, Love and family and being present for the people who need us. Natasha leaned her head against his shoulder. You built wonderful things, Michael. You helped thousands of people. But you're right, this is what gives it all meaning. I wish I could go back, Michael said quietly. I wish I could tell that young man not to leave, not to throw away what really mattered. But if you could go back and change it, Natasha said thoughtfully, we wouldn't be these people standing here today. Sarah wouldn't be exactly who she is. Tommy and Emma wouldn't exist in quite the same way. We had to walk the paths we walked to arrive at this moment. The question isn't whether we would change the past, but what we do with the time we have left. Michael turned and looked at the woman he had loved for more than 30 years, through separation and silence and finally reunion. Then he knelt down on one knee, right there in the grass with their family as witnesses, and pulled out a simple ring he had been carrying for weeks. Natasha Miller, he said, his voice strong and sure, I loved you when we were young and foolish, and I love you now that we are older and hopefully wiser. I wasted 30 years, and I don't want to waste another day. Will you marry me? Natasha's tears came freely as she pulled him to his feet and kissed him, and in the background they could hear Sarah and David cheering while Emma asked loudly what was happening and why Grandma was crying. They were married that summer in Sarah's backyard, surrounded by family and friends. Michael walked his daughter down the aisle at her vow renewal ceremony the same day, giving her away for the second time in her life, properly this time. And as he danced with Natasha under the stars that night, he thought about the young man he had been and the man he had become. Life rarely gives second chances, he had learned. But when it does, when grace and mercy align to offer one more opportunity to get it right, the wisest thing a person can do is reach out with both hands and hold on tight to what matters most. And in the years that followed, in the laughter of grandchildren and the quiet comfort of Natasha's hand in his, Michael discovered that the best part of life isn't the beginning or even the middle, but rather those precious moments when we finally understand what truly matters and have the courage to embrace it fully. Some stories end where they begin, and that is not a tragedy but a gift, a reminder that love, once true, never really dies but only waits patiently for us to find our way back home.